Hey guys, Kazunga here, and today we're going to be going over one of my new favorite pulse rifles for Destiny 2's PvP, the Darkest Before. I'll be going over both PvP and PvE performance of this new pulse, and when this video goes live, I will be streaming over on my Twitch channel, which is linked in the description of this video. I'll probably be playing some Iron Banner over there, and maybe doing some runs of Vault of Glass or just other Pinnacle drops for the week. It'll be a lot of fun, so come check it out. Anyways, let's get on to the video. Now, anybody that's been watching my channel for a while will know that I don't make PvP-focused videos very often, so when I find a weapon that I feel like deserves recognition in PvP enough for me to want to make a video on it alone, I like to think that it means it's just that strong. And throughout Destiny, rapid-fire pulse rifles have kind of always been pretty solid for PvP. I like to think of things like the original version of Darkest Before, the Time-Worn Spire, and Horror's Least having all been really strong in the past. And last season, we got the new pulse rifle Grid Skipper, which I think actually landed pretty well, but I also felt like it didn't necessarily explode the meta at the time, partly due to how strong 120 RPM hand cannons were upon its release, as well as the fact that if you just didn't like the perks that Grid Skipper offered, you weren't going to get to use a rapid-fire pulse in the energy slot. Pair that with our kinetic rapid fires. We only had Time-Worn Spire at the time, which didn't have the best rolls in my opinion, alongside the fact that it had to compete with stuff like the Messenger, which was just much better, having perks like Desperado. And then all that brings us to Season of the Lost, which saw the reissuing of a bunch of the old Trials of the Nine weapons, including Darkest Before, which if you weren't playing during Curse of Osiris, not that I blame you, the Darkest Before absolutely wrecked the PvP meta when it came out. And again, these weapons are dropping from the Prophecy Dungeon, with Darkest Before dropping from the Final Encounter specifically. In terms of stats, the Darkest Before is on par with the Grid Skipper, although it has slightly different zoom and recoil direction stats. The rest of the stats are almost identical actually, assuming the barrels and magazines are the same. However, the biggest reason that I think the Darkest Before rises above Grid Skipper is going to be its perks. The Darkest Before is still able to receive its old Year 1 static roll of Slide Shot and Full Auto, but it can now also get other random perks in both columns. Things like Surplus, Tunnel Vision, Rampage, and Elemental Capacitor are actually quite solid on this pulse rifle. I've landed a few of the variety of rolls, and I've gotten quite a bit of time to play with them, but I have eventually settled on one with small bore, ricochet rounds, slide shot, rampage, and a range masterwork as my favorite, and the one I would like to highlight for this video. In my opinion, slide shot is really solid on this weapon, even after all this time, given that it did roll on the original version of it, and a big part of what sets it apart from Grid Skipper is actually slide shot. Since even though Grid Skipper is able to get slide ways, slide shot is actually just way better in almost every respect. Slide shot will increase the range and stability rather than just the handling and stability. I like slide shot for that reason alone, given that sliding before taking an engagement will allow me to have even more range than my opponent may expect. This is also part of the reason why for Darkest Before specifically, I like Slide Shot more than I like Surplus, since even though Surplus is a great handling and stability buff, Slide Shot is a great stability and range buff, as well as giving a slight reload to the weapon. And yes, even though Bungie did nerf sliding in this last season, I will say that Slide Shot lasts for about 3 seconds after coming out of your slide, so rather than starting the engagement while sliding, I try to start the engagement coming out of my slide, since the Slide Shot stability and range buff will linger for a little while, and it does a great job of flattening out the recoil pattern of this weapon. I also like Slide Shot because it has very high uptime with virtually no sacrifice, whereas with Surplus, you will lose the buffs once you start using your abilities, like your grenades and your melee. With Slide Shot active, this pulse was consistently able to break ranges of about 34 to 36 meters before experiencing range fall off, depending on the barrel that you have on the pulse rifle. As for my fourth column perk, I finally settled on Rampage as my favorite for a couple of reasons. Sure, full auto trigger is nice for these rapid fire pulses, and Elemental Capacitor will give you more stat bonuses, but for me, I liked getting an 11% damage buff for every kill, even if that meant I had to repeatedly mash my fire button to shoot. Once you start getting some Rampage stacks rolling, especially inside of 6v6 where there's a lot of players and a lot of kills to be had, you'll be hitting for damage similar to higher impact pulses like Third Axiom or the Messenger, but with a much, much higher fire rate, allowing you to have a really, really fast time to kill for a primary weapon, and inside of 3v3, it'll allow you to turn some quick picks into potential double kills with your damage buff, since at mid-range you can keep this weapon on a target relatively easily, even while getting weapon flinched. The only thing I found out of the current version of the sandbox that was melting a little harder at the same ranges was the Vex Mythoclast, but that's its own thing, given that the Vex, after its buff in Season of the Lost, is a special type of strong inside of the Crucible at the current moment. In total, for PvP, I think that the Darkest Before is absolutely cracked, and I 100% recommend going into Prophecy and picking one up before Trials drops next weekend. To farm it, the best thing to do is just going to be to grab a checkpoint on one of your alternate characters and run the boss fight over and over again, making sure to keep the checkpoint, since you have a chance to get this thing every time you kill the Prophecy boss. It's not on a weekly lockout. I have a little bit less to say on the PvE side of things, given that primary weapons are kind of just primary weapons for the most part in PvE, aside from their perks. But I do think that Darkest Before also deserves a bit of a spotlight for PvE, since it's arguably the best arc damage pulse rifle we currently have. The only other options for arc damage pulse rifles are currently the Geon 7 rifle, which doesn't have very good perks, all things considered, when you're looking at in-game content. The other arc damage pulse we currently have is the third Axiom, which has so many perks in each column that landing a solid one will be almost impossible, given that it is an uncommon drop from strikes. So have fun trying to grind for that if you decide that's the one you want. The Darkest Before, however, has access to Surplus, Subsistence, and Overflow in the third column, and both Rampage and One for All in the fourth column. Rampage is alright, but One for All will give you a 35% damage boost just for tagging 3 different enemies. And given that pulse rifles are on the artifact this season, you may want to consider using it for some GM Nightfalls, where a fusion rifle just doesn't quite fit into the energy slot for you. Or even in future seasons with pulse rifles on the artifact, since this thing can get some really strong perks. I landed one with Surplus and One for All, and I used it in some Master Nightfalls earlier this week, and I was very impressed with how well it performed. It's definitely not as broken as something like the Vex Mythoclast right now, but it is extremely solid for a legendary pulse rifle in the current season inside of PvE as well, and I plan on breaking it out anytime that pulse rifles are in the artifact, simply because it does such a great job of being a reliable primary with consistently high performance. And I just really like it as well. It feels good to shoot, especially in PvE, compared to other pulse rifles we currently have. However, that's all I have to say about Darkest Before, so if you liked this video or found it helpful, remember that a like and subscribe help out the channel a ton, and feel free to leave a comment letting me know what you liked about the video or what I can do better in the next ones, or you can just leave a comment letting me know what you think about Darkest Before. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, I'll be live on Twitch grinding out some Destiny stuff for a few hours after this video goes up, so if you feel like it, check me out over there. Link is in description as always, and thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day.